The town had long fallen asleep, wrapped in the kind of silence that only winter nights can create. Frost clung to the edges of street signs, and the air was so cold it seemed to freeze sound itself. That's why the sudden bang on the old metal door of the Iron Wolves Biker Club felt like a thunderclap ripping through the night. Inside, most of the bikers had already drifted into a lazy calm after a long day of riding. A few sat around a table playing cards, their laughter rough but warm. Blade, the club's leader, leaned back in his chair, polishing the chrome handle of his custom-made knife. He wasn't a man easily startled, but even he raised his head at the desperate knock. It wasn't the kind of knock made by someone angry or bold. No, this one carried fear. Real fear. The second knock was harder, trembling, like the hand behind it was fighting against time itself. Blade rose slowly, every movement deliberate. Who the hell knocks at midnight? He muttered, but not with annoyance. Something in his gut told him this was different. The others looked up too, tension creeping into the room. Midnight visitors meant trouble, and trouble usually meant violence. Blade walked to the door, boots echoing across the concrete floor. He placed one hand on the handle, pausing for a split second. He didn't know why, but he felt the need to brace himself. Then he pulled it open. A blast of cold air rushed in, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of fear. Standing in the doorway was a teenage boy, thin, pale, barely more than 14. His clothes were too big for him, soaked with melting snow, and his hair clung to his forehead as though he had been running for miles. But it was his eyes that froze Blade in place. Wide, frantic, pleading. Eyes that had seen far too much for someone his age. "Please," the boy gasped, voice cracking from exhaustion. "Please, I need your help." Blade's brows furrowed. "Kid, do you know where you are?" His voice was rough, but not unkind. The boy nodded quickly, swallowing hard. Yes, I know. The biker club. The Iron Wolves. People say you're dangerous." He looked over his shoulder into the dark, as if expecting something, or someone, to appear. "That's why I came." Blade exchanged a puzzled glance with Red, who had silently stepped behind him. The boy's breath shook as he forced out the words that would change everything. "Can you hide my sister for one night?" Before Blade could respond, a small figure stepped into the dim light behind the boy. A little girl, no more than 7, clutching a torn teddy bear to her chest. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, and her eyes, soft, terrified, looked straight into Blade's with a kind of silent, desperate hope. In that moment, something shifted inside him. The hardened biker, the man feared across counties, felt a punch to the heart he couldn't explain. Without knowing their story, without thinking about the danger, he felt a single instinct rise: protect them. The cold night didn't feel so cold anymore. And the Iron Wolves were not the same men they had been just minutes before. For a long moment, no one moved. The cold wind pushed gently against the open door, carrying with it a faint whistle that sounded almost like the night urging Blade to act. The little girl stood half hidden behind her brother, as though afraid the darkness itself might reach out and drag her back. Blade knelt down slowly, lowering himself to the children's level. Up close, he could see details the dim light had softened before. Dark circles under the girl's eyes, the small cuts on the boy's knuckles, the way her tiny fingers dug into the fabric of her brother's jacket as if he were the only safe thing she had left in the world. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Blade asked gently, his voice softer than anyone in the club had heard in years. The girl didn't answer. Instead, she hugged her teddy bear tighter and took a tiny step back, not out of distrust toward Blade, but out of instinct. Some children hide behind silence when the world becomes too loud. The boy spoke for her. "Her name is Lily," he said, voice trembling. "She's only 7. A ripple of tension moved through the bikers gathered near the entrance. Tough, tattooed men who'd seen fights, crashes, and street wars suddenly felt their throats tighten. Children didn't belong in this kind of story. Red stepped forward, arms crossed, trying to mask his concern. "Where's your home? Why come here?" At the question, Lily visibly flinched. She looked at her brother, eyes silently asking him if they really had to speak about it. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, Lil," he whispered. She took a shaky breath. Then, in a voice barely louder than the falling snow outside, she said, "I don't want to go back. The words hit the room like a crack in the heart. Blade's eyes narrowed, not in anger toward the children, but in fury toward whatever, or whoever, had driven them to seek shelter among strangers in leather jackets at midnight. The boy continued, "They said they're coming tonight. The people, the ones who hurt us. They said they'd take her away." His voice broke, and he hurried to wipe the tears that escaped. "I couldn't let that happen. I ran with her. I didn't know where else to go." He looked up at Blade, eyes raw and begging. "People say you don't fear anyone, and that you protect your own. I thought maybe you'd protect her too." The room, usually filled with the clang of tools, rock music, and the roar of engines, had fallen completely silent. Each biker exchanged glances, their hardened expressions melting into something deeply human and painfully real. Lily finally stepped forward, standing in a thin beam of light from the doorway. Her teddy bear hung at her side now, its head touching the floor. She whispered, "I just want to sleep without being scared." A single tear slid down Blade's face before he could stop it. He quickly wiped it away, clearing his throat. But everyone had seen it. In that moment, those two children didn't look like trouble. They didn't look like a burden or a risk. They looked like family. Family the world had failed. And inside that rough biker club, beneath leather vests and steel-hard faces, something sacred awakened. The fierce, unbreakable instinct to protect the innocent. The biker clubhouse, usually alive with noise, now felt like a sanctuary wrapped in heavy silence. The dim lights flickered softly, casting long shadows across the wooden walls lined with old trophies, worn leather jackets, and photos of a past many men tried to forget. Tonight, however, the room seemed to breathe differently, quieter, gentler, as if it understood the fragile hearts now sheltered inside it. Blade guided the children to a patched-up leather couch near the heater. Lily sat first, clutching her teddy bear so tightly its stuffing seemed ready to burst. Her brother hovered protectively at her side, his thin shoulders squared as if he were standing between her and the entire world. The bikers gathered around, not too close, but close enough to show they were listening. The men who once intimidated half the county now softened their posture, leaning in just enough to show respect and patience. Iron Jack was the first to break the silence. He knelt so his eyes met the children's level. Though his face was covered in scars and a thick beard, his expression was unexpectedly tender. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "No one's gonna touch you while we're around." The boy swallowed hard, his voice tight. "No place has been safe for a long time." Blade nodded. "Then we need to understand what you're running from." The boy hesitated. His gaze fell to the floor, tracing invisible patterns on the concrete. Lily rested her head on his shoulder. Finally, he took a shaky breath. "Our stepfather," he whispered. "He drinks. A lot. When he does, he hits. Not just me." His voice broke, and he looked at Lily with a mix of guilt and pain. "He said she needed to be taught to behave." A low growl rumbled from Red's chest. He balled his fists so hard his knuckles turned white. "Coward," he muttered. The boy continued. "Mom tries to stop him sometimes, but he gets worse. Last night he said he was taking Lily away. Said she'd learn properly if she wasn't under my influence." Tears blurred his vision. "I couldn't let him touch her again. So we ran." Lily tucked the teddy bear under her chin. "He said monsters aren't real," she whispered. "But he looked like one." A thick silence filled the room. Iron Jack sat back slowly, then lifted his forearm, revealing a deep scar running from elbow to wrist. "I know monsters," he said. "Had one of my own once." Blade looked at him, surprised. Iron Jack rarely spoke of his past. "I ran too," Jack continued. "Ran until someone decided I was worth protecting. That scar, it's not from fights. It's from surviving." The boy stared at him, wondering if maybe his own scars, visible and invisible, didn't make him weak. The other bikers glanced at each other, sharing silent memories they rarely spoke aloud. Tough faces softened, forgotten pains resurfaced, and in those moments, the children weren't strangers anymore, they were reflections of who these men once were. Blade stepped forward and placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "You came to the right place," he said firmly. "We know what it means to run. We also know how to stand." For the first time since they'd arrived, the boy exhaled, a long, trembling breath filled with fear, relief, and something new, trust. And Lily, resting her head against her brother, whispered the tiniest word, soft as falling ash. "Thank you." The clubhouse air felt heavier now, but not with fear. With purpose. With something unspoken but understood among every biker in the room. The Iron Wolves had been tested before. By rival gangs, by loss, by the darkness of their own histories, but nothing tested their souls quite like two shivering children seeking refuge at their door. Blade stood tall at the center of the room, the low hum of the heater casting warm light across his weathered face. His jaw was tense, but his eyes, usually cold, calculating, had softened. He looked at the children, then at his men, each one standing a little straighter than before. "Listen up," Blade said, his voice deep, steady. "These kids stay with us tonight." A murmur rippled through the bikers, not of disagreement, but of growing fire. They knew what Blade's words meant. A choice like this wasn't simple. It wasn't safe, but it was right. Red crossed his arms and stepped forward. "If anyone comes looking," he said, "they'll have to go through me first." Shadow, the quietest member of the club, nodded firmly. "And me." One by one, the others echoed the same silent vow, some with nods, others with clenched fists or soft words. The room felt like a fortress forming around the children, built not of walls, but of loyalty and raw, unmistakable humanity. Lily, sitting on the couch hugging her teddy bear, watched the men with wide, cautious eyes. She wasn't used to grown-ups raising their voices for her, only at her. But these voices were different. Strong, protective, like shields made of flesh and bone. The boy, who had spent months feeling alone in the world, looked at Blade with something close to disbelief. "Why are you helping us?" he asked softly. Blade took a slow breath, choosing his words like they mattered, because they did. "Because no kid should ever have to run," he said. "And definitely not from someone who's supposed to keep them safe." He then turned toward the group. "Red, get them something warm to eat. Shadow, set up the back room with blankets. And Jack, stay by the door. No surprises tonight." Orders flew into motion instantly. Red hurried to the tiny kitchen area, rummaging for soup cans and bread. Shadow disappeared into the storage room, returning with a stack of thick blankets and a spare mattress. Iron Jack positioned himself by the door like a silent guardian, arms folded, watching the entrance with eyes that had once seen too much darkness to ever let it pass again. Lily and her brother watched everything unfold with awe. This wasn't chaos, it was care. Rough, loud, imperfect care, but care all the same. Blade crouched in front of Lily and brushed a strand of hair from her face, not touching her, just giving her space. "You're safe," he said again, quieter this time. "We won't let anyone hurt you." Her lip trembled. "Not even him," she whispered. Blade's eyes hardened. "Especially not him." The girl exhaled a shaky breath. Her tiny body finally loosened, like she'd been holding tension her whole life without even knowing it. With the mattress set up and warm soup poured into mismatched bowls, the siblings ate silently, but not fearfully. Every biker in the room kept an eye on them, not out of suspicion, but out of responsibility. As Blade watched them settle under the blankets, he felt a shift deep inside his chest, something heavy, but good. A reminder of who he used to be before life hardened him. A reminder of the man he could still choose to be. Tonight, the Iron Wolves weren't thieves, fighters, or misfits. Tonight, they were protectors. And the children, for the first time in a long time, weren't prey. They were home. Morning arrived gently, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace inside the clubhouse. Soft sunlight filtered through the high windows, casting warm gold across the room where Lily and her brother slept curled together under thick blankets. The roar of the world outside had quieted for them, at least for one night. Blade sat at the table, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. He hadn't slept. Not because he was worried, but because he didn't want to miss a moment. Something about knowing those two kids finally slept without fear made the sleepless night feel like a privilege, not a burden. Red leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching the children too. "Haven't seen you look like that in years," he muttered. Blade raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Like someone remembered where he hid his heart." Blade didn't argue. He couldn't. Because it was true. As the sun rose higher, the rest of the bikers stirred from their makeshift beds. Iron Jack remained at the entrance, exactly where he'd stood most of the night. Shadow brought another pot of coffee. No one complained about stiff backs or cold floors. Some things were worth the discomfort. Around 8 a.m., there was a gentle knock at the door, not frantic, not threatening. A calm, professional knock. Blade shot Red a look. Red nodded and moved to wake the siblings gently. Blade opened the door to find two social workers standing outside, clipboards in hand. A police officer accompanied them, but his posture wasn't aggressive. He gave Blade a polite nod, clearly aware of who he was dealing with. The older social worker spoke first. "You called us last night. Said it was urgent." Blade stepped aside. "They're inside. Safe." The woman's eyes softened. "Thank you." Red guided the children toward the table. Lily held her teddy bear tightly. The boy kept a protective arm around her shoulders. They weren't crying, but their fear lingered just beneath the surface. The social workers knelt to speak with them, voices gentle and reassuring. Lily hesitated, glancing toward Blade. The fear in her eyes said everything. "Will you leave us? Will you hand us over just like that?" Blade came closer and crouched beside her, resting one hand lightly on the table, not touching her, but grounding her. "These people aren't here to take you back," he said softly. "They're here to get you somewhere safe. Somewhere he can't reach you again." Lily blinked slowly, letting the words settle in her heart. The boy looked up. "Will we ever see you again?" Blade swallowed. The question hit deeper than he expected. He glanced back at his men, every one of them standing tall, silent, but undeniably proud. "You'll see us whenever you need us," Blade said. "The Iron Wolves don't forget their own." The siblings hugged him tightly, Lily first, then her brother. Blade closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of that tiny embrace soften all the hardened parts of him. As the social workers led the children out, Lily turned one last time and whispered, "You saved us." Blade shook his head softly, voice thick. "No, sweetheart, you saved us." The door closed gently behind them. Silence filled the room again, but not the heavy kind. This was peaceful silence, healing silence, the kind that follows a choice well made. Red stretched and grunted. "Never thought we'd spend our night protecting kids." Iron Jack smirked. "Guess we're getting old." Blade looked at the sunlight streaming through the window, warming the space where the children had slept. "No," he said quietly. "We're getting better." And as the Iron Wolves prepared for another day, something had undeniably changed. They weren't just a biker club anymore. They were a family, strong enough to protect, brave enough to care, and human enough to be transformed by two children who knocked on their door when the world failed them.